Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. In August 2005, 39-year-old Sarita Bradley documented one of Washington D.C.'s most unsettling haunted house experiences, events that had occurred in her own home 6 years earlier in 1999 when she was 33. Unlike many who encounter supernatural phenomena in newly purchased homes, Sarita had lived in this house her entire life, sharing it with her mother in a neighbourhood notable for its proximity to not one but 3 cemeteries that stretched out behind their property. The events began at 3 a.m. during one of Sarita's frequent sleepless nights. Her hamster, jestfully named Mouse, seemed equally restless, repeatedly kicking wood shavings out of his cage situated atop her dresser. From her position on the bed about 5 feet away, Sarita watched as Mouse persistently pushed the bedding through the cage bars, creating an ever-growing pile on the floor below. Initially, she thought he would tire of this behaviour, but he continued until a significant amount of shavings had accumulated beneath his cage. When Sarita finally rose to investigate, an unpleasant odour reached her nose. Mouse's cage desperately needed cleaning. Opening the cage, she lifted out her tiny pet, giving his furry head an apologetic kiss for having left his home in such a state. Though Mouse wasn't formally trained, he was exceptionally well behaved, allowing Sarita to set him free in her room while she tackled the cleaning task. She carefully removed the cage from the dresser, laid newspaper out on the floor to catch any mess, and placed the cage on top of it, beginning to separate the steel cage from the bottom tray to replace the soiled shavings. Sarita positioned herself kneeling in the open doorway, her back to the hall, confident that Mouse wouldn't take advantage of the open door to explore beyond her room, as he never had before. As she worked, she noticed Mouse periodically freezing in place. Given that hamsters sometimes suffer from paralysis as they age, she initially dismissed this behaviour as a natural occurrence. However, something about Mouse's demeanour became increasingly disturbing. He remained completely still, balanced on his hind legs, staring fixedly at the doorway for an unnaturally long 5 minutes. It was then that Sarita experienced that primal sensation, the hair rising on the back of her neck, followed immediately by an intense, unnatural cold. Fear rooted her in place as she knelt there, slowly forcing herself to turn and face the open doorway. What emerged from the bathroom to her left defied all rational explanation. An apparition floated through the air, a white woman wearing a flowing white nightgown, her shoulder-length black hair streaked with grey and parted precisely down the middle. She was soaking wet from head to toe, as if recently submerged, with water visibly dripping from her gown onto the floor as she passed. Sarita could see every detail of the spirit, including her bare feet, yet found herself paralysed with terror, unable to move, run, or even scream. In horrified silence, she watched as the drowned woman drifted by. Then came the moment that would haunt Sarita's nightmares. The spirit turned to look directly at her. The ghost's expression, initially sad and sombre, transformed into something truly terrifying. Her features contorted into a look of such intense hatred that Sarita could physically feel the malevolence radiating through the air. The spirit maintained this hateful glare, its evil frown burning into Sarita's memory, until it finally passed beyond the doorway. Even after the apparition disappeared, Sarita remained frozen in place, her body refusing to respond except for her right arm, which she managed to use to grab the door and pull it shut. In the terrifying aftermath, she suddenly remembered Mouse, praying he was still in the room. Relief flooded through her when he peeked out from beneath the dresser moments later. Scooping him up in her hand to comfort them both, Sarita spent the remainder of the night sitting in her brightly lit room, struggling to process what she had witnessed. The next morning, still shaken, Sarita shared her experience with her mother, sister and niece. They responded with the expected scepticism, but their disbelief would prove short-lived. That very same day, while Sarita's mother was upstairs cleaning, having turned off all the downstairs lights except for one in the living room, Sarita's sister went downstairs to retrieve some bedroom slippers she'd left by the sofa. As Sarita and her mother chatted in the upstairs hallway, they were abruptly startled by a terrifying noise, a blood-curdling scream, unlike anything they'd ever heard before or since. Sarita's sister came scrambling up the stairs on her hands and knees, climbing as if death itself were in pursuit. Her face was flushed red, tears streaming down her cheeks as she tried unsuccessfully to form coherent words through her terror. For 10 full minutes they worked to calm her enough to speak. When she finally managed to tell her story, they learned that, as she'd knelt by the sofa to retrieve her slippers, something had compelled her to look toward the dining room. There she saw a figure that both was and wasn't the same as what Sarita had encountered. A lady in a nightgown, but this time appearing as a very elderly woman with long grey hair flowing down to her waist. The spirit had reached out toward her with outstretched arms, wearing the same evil expression Sarita had witnessed. The experience so traumatized Sarita's sister that she refused to remain in the house, calling a friend to take her in for the night. The final appearance of the spirit occurred just 2 days later, when Sarita's 18-year-old niece came to visit. While they were chatting in Sarita's room, her niece excused herself to use the bathroom. Within seconds, they heard her screaming. She flew out of the bathroom, down the stairs, and straight out the front door. Sarita ran after her, finding her outside, repeatedly crying, "I saw her, I saw her, I saw her." When finally calmed enough to explain, she described entering the bathroom without turning on the light, relying on the hallway's illumination. As she'd washed her hands and glanced up into the mirror, she'd seen the same elderly woman with long grey hair and that terrible grimacing expression that Sarita's sister had described. The timing of these encounters puzzled the family. Sarita's sister's sighting just 1 day after hers, her niece's just 2 days after that. But even more perplexing was the apparent transformation of the spirit. While Sarita had seen a middle-aged woman, both her sister and niece had encountered an elderly one with long grey hair. Though the drowned woman never appeared to anyone else after these 3 incidents, her presence continued to manifest in other ways. The bathroom faucets would frequently turn on by themselves, requiring regular checking. Sarita would sometimes be in her room or coming up the stairs when she'd hear water running, only to find an empty bathroom with either the hot or cold tap flowing. On one particularly concerning occasion, she barely caught the sink before it overflowed, finding not only the water running, but the stopper in place. Even years later, when documenting her story in 2005, the house still experienced unexplained phenomena, most commonly phantom knocking at doors with no one present. Living behind 3 cemeteries, the family had developed their own theories about the haunting. Through her research, Sarita learned that supernatural activity often intensifies after rainstorms, and that some hauntings are simply recordings of past events replaying themselves at certain times. However, the interactive nature of their experiences would seem to rule this possibility out. Other relatives, upon hearing their experiences, suggested the house might actually be built over cemetery graves, encouraging the family to research the property's history. Given their location behind 3 cemeteries, the Bradleys largely accepted this explanation as plausible. Whatever caused the drowned woman to appear that night, and whatever compelled her to reveal herself to 3 family members in succession, they made their peace with it. Living so close to multiple cemeteries, they accepted that they weren't alone in their house. As Sarita reflected on these events in 2005, she noted how the supernatural activity had become such a regular part of their lives that they'd simply adapted to it, much as one might adapt to any other peculiarity of their home. As long as their uninvited guests meant no harm, they learned to coexist with whatever existed on the other side, accepting that the line between the world of the living and the dead wasn't quite as clear as most people might think.